Before there were kings, before there were prophets, temples, wars, exiles, or resurrections, there were 5 books. 5 books that form the bedrock of the entire Bible. 5 books that shaped 3 of the world's major religions. 5 books that ask the questions every human being eventually asks. Who made us? Why does everything feel broken, and is there anything we can do to fix it? What's remarkable is that these 5 books don't just ask those questions, they begin to answer them. And the answers they set in motion, the promises, the symbols, and the patterns, are still unfolding by the very last page of Scripture. This is the Pentateuch, and this is where everything begins. The word Pentateuch comes from the Greek penta, meaning 5, and teuchos, meaning scroll, 5 scrolls. In Jewish tradition, they're often called the Torah, the law, the instruction, or the teaching. In Hebrew, they're more often referred to simply by their opening words. Genesis is Bereshit, which means in the beginning. Exodus is Shemot, which means names. Leviticus is Vayikra, which means and he called. Numbers is Bemidah, which means in the desert. And Deuteronomy is Devarim, which means words, because the book is filled with the final speech of Moses. These 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, are traditionally attributed to Moses, written somewhere in the 15th to the 13th century BC. But the stories they contain reach back to before time itself. Together, they form one continuous, carefully constructed narrative, not a collection of myths loosely stitched together, but a single unfolding story with a beginning, a crisis, and a trajectory that the rest of the Bible exists to resolve. Everything in the Bible, every king, every prophet, every psalm, every letter, every vision is downstream of what these 5 books establish in the beginning. So let's walk through them and pay close attention, because the authors of these books hid more inside them than most people ever notice. Let's begin. Genesis, the book of beginnings. Genesis opens with arguably the most important sentence ever written. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. No explanation for where God came from, no argument for his existence, just the statement, clean and absolute. Before everything, there was God, and God made everything. Over 6 days, order is brought from chaos, light separated from darkness, sea from sky, and land from water, and on the 6th day, the pinnacle of creation, humanity, made not like the animals, but in the image of God. The Hebrew phrase is Selem Elohim. It's a royal term. The image bearers are God's representatives on earth, tasked with ruling and tending his creation. The world begins as a temple and humanity are its priests. But Genesis doesn't stay in the garden for long. By chapter 3, everything unravels. The serpent appears, subtle, twisting God's words, and the man and the woman choose to reach for something God had withheld. They eat, and the moment they do, something ruptures. Shame enters the world for the first time. They hide, they blame each other, the ground itself even becomes cursed. God responds with justice, yes, but listen carefully to what he says to the serpent. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. This is the first promise in the Bible. Theologians call it the proto-evangelium, the first gospel. A child of the woman will one day defeat the serpent. It's one sentence, barely noticed on a first reading, but the entire Bible is the story of that promise being kept and unfolding. And notice what God does next. He makes garments of skin for Adam and Eve to cover their shame. Something dies so that they can be clothed. It's the first bloodshed in Scripture, and it happens right at the beginning, right at the point of human failure. And it won't be the last time that this pattern appears. From the garden, the story accelerates in the wrong direction. Cain murders Abel, Civilization grows, but so does violence. By chapter 6, things are so broken that God sends a flood and starts again with a man named Noah and his family. And after the flood, God creates a promise, a covenant, marked by a rainbow. He will never again destroy the earth by flood. The story isn't over for humanity just yet. But then comes the Tower of Babel. Humanity, united in pride, builds a tower in attempt to reach the heavens to be like God. God scatters them across the earth, dividing the humans by their languages. The human family is now fractured and spread to the four corners of the world. You're 11 chapters into the Bible, and the earth looks like an irreversible disaster. And then, in chapter 12, the whole direction of the story shifts. God calls a man named Abram, living in the city of Ur in Mesopotamia, and makes him a promise that will echo through the rest of the Bible. Leave your country, your people, your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you, and through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. All the families of the earth. The scattering of Babel is going to be reversed, not by force, but through one man's family carrying a blessing outwards to everyone who was scattered. The rest of Genesis is the story of that promise surviving, barely, through 4 generations. Abram, the man God just gave this promise to, becomes Abraham and waits 25 years for a son he was promised in his old age. When Isaac, his son, finally comes, the son of promise is finally born, God asks Abraham to give him back, to climb a mountain called Moriah and offer his son as a sacrifice. Abraham goes, and as they walk up the mountain, Isaac asks, "Father, where is the lamb?" And Abraham says something extraordinary. He says, God himself will provide the lamb. And at the last moment, God stops Abraham. There's a ram caught in a thicket, and it dies in Isaac's place. And Abraham names the place Jehovah Jireh, which means the Lord will provide. The mountain's name was Moriah. Centuries later, that same mountain would become the site of the temple in Jerusalem, and according to ancient tradition, it is the very hill where a far greater sacrifice would one day take place, not stopped at the last moment. Isaac has Jacob, a deceiver, a wrestler, a man God renames Israel, has 12 sons, and of those 12 sons, one becomes the most remarkable figure in all of Genesis. Joseph, favored by his father, despised by his brothers, stripped of his coat, thrown into a pit, sold to slave traders for 20 pieces of silver, taken to Egypt, falsely accused, thrown into prison, and then, inexplicably, raised to the right hand of Pharaoh, second in command over all Egypt. And when a famine occurs, his brothers arrive in Egypt desperate for food. Joseph, the brother they betrayed, has the power to destroy them if he wants to, but instead, he saves them. He weeps over them. He says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." Joseph is one of the most striking portraits in the whole Old Testament of someone who would come much later, betrayed by those closest to him, unjustly condemned, raised to a position of ultimate authority and using that authority not to take revenge, but to save the very people who rejected him. Genesis ends with 70 people, Jacob's whole family, settled in Egypt, safe and grateful, but still a long, long way from the Promised Land. Exodus. 400 years pass between the last verse of Genesis and the opening of Exodus. 400 years of silence. The 70 who arrived as guests have become a nation of millions, but the political winds have shifted. A new Pharaoh sits on the throne, one who didn't know Joseph. And what he sees is a threat. So he enslaves Israel, the entire nation. He works them to exhaustion, and even when that doesn't contain their growth, he orders something unthinkable. Every Hebrew baby boy thrown into the Nile. The book of Exodus opens with Israel at the lowest point in their history, enslaved, crushed, and crying out to a God who, for hundreds of years, had seemed silent. But God heard, and the writer of Exodus wants us to feel the weight of that. Into this moment, a baby is born. His mother hides him for 3 months, and when she can no longer hide him, she does something that looks like an act of absolute desperation, but carries the fingerprints of faith. She puts him in a basket, a small ark, the same Hebrew word used for Noah's Ark, and places him in the Nile. The very river meant to kill him becomes the river that carries him to safety. He's found by Pharaoh's daughter, raised in the palace, and given the name Moses, which means drawn out of the water. Moses grows up straddling 2 worlds, Hebrew by blood, Egyptian by upbringing. And when he sees an Egyptian beating one of his people, something in him breaks. He kills the Egyptian, and when he realizes what he's done and that it's known by others, he runs away. 40 years pass in the wilderness of Midian. A prince becomes a shepherd. Whatever fire once burned in Moses has seemingly gone out. He has a wife, a family, a quiet life at the edge of the world. Whatever God was doing with him, it seemed to be over. And then, on just an ordinary day, on the slopes of a mountain called Horeb, he sees something that stops him in his tracks. A bush on fire, but not burning, not being consumed, not shrinking, not collapsing into ash, just burning, steadily, impossibly, as though the fire had no interest in destroying the thing it inhabited. Moses walked towards it because there's simply no other reasonable response to something that shouldn't exist, and God speaks to him from the fire. He tells Moses who he is, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He tells him that he has seen the suffering of his people, heard their crying, known their pain. And then he tells Moses his name, not a title, his actual name, Yahweh. It means, I am who I am. Not I was, not I will be, I am. Pure, self-existent, underived being, the ground of everything that exists. And this God is sending Moses back to Egypt and commissions him, saying, Go, stand before Pharaoh and bring my people out. What follows is one of the great confrontations in all of history. 10 plagues, each one a direct assault on the gods of Egypt. The Nile turned to blood, the sun darkened, the land overrun with locusts and frogs and death. Each plague is God systematically dismantling every power Egypt once trusted in. The 10th plague is the most devastating and the most loaded. The firstborn of every household in Egypt will die unless the house is marked, a lamb, unblemished, 1 year old, without broken bones, is slaughtered, and its blood is painted on the doorposts and lintel of the house, and the angel of death passes over every home marked with the blood. The Passover, a moment so significant that God tells Israel, this month will be the first month of your calendar year from now on. This is your new beginning. Mark it every year, forever. 1,000 years later, on the eve of this very feast, a man rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, while the city swelled with pilgrims who had come from across the known world to sacrifice their Passover lambs. The religious leaders who orchestrated his execution were careful to make sure it happened before the Sabbath. When the soldiers came to break the legs of the 3 men on the crosses, to hasten death before sundown, they found that one of them was already dead. They didn't break his legs. The Gospel of John records this and then stops to point it out. These things happened so that the scripture would be fulfilled. Not one of his bones will be broken. A reference even as far back as the Passover lamb instructions from Exodus chapter 12. Israel leaves Egypt after the Passover, and Pharaoh, consumed by grief for his son and fury at what has happened to his empire, changes his mind about letting Israel go free. 600 of his best chariots, his entire cavalry, the most powerful military force on earth, thundering across the desert in pursuit of a nation of former slaves. Israel hears them before they see them, the rumble of hooves and wheels closing in from behind, and ahead, the Red Sea, vast, dark, completely uncrossable. They're trapped, completely, with no way out. The sea in front, the mountains on either side, and the Egyptian army right behind them. The panic is immediate. People are screaming, some are rounding on Moses. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us here to die? After everything, the plagues, the Passover, the miraculous departure, it takes exactly 3 days for the people to be convinced that it was all a mistake. The terror is real. The threat is real. If something doesn't happen, this is the end of the entire nation. Moses tells them, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today." He stretches his hand out over the sea, and the water splits open. A strong east wind drives it back through the night. The waters stand as walls on either side. The ground beneath, the seabed, is dry, and Israel walks through. Every man, every woman, and every child through the middle of the sea, between the walls of water, on dry ground. The Egyptians follow them, and then God looks down at the Egyptian army from the pillar of fire and cloud and throws them into confusion. The wheels of their chariots jam. The drivers cry out, "Let's get away from Israel. The Lord is fighting for them." But it's too late for them. Moses stretches out his hand again. The waters come back, crashing, rushing, and the entire army of Egypt is swallowed up by the sea. On the other side, Israel stands free. For the first time in 400 years, they are free, and they sing spontaneously together, Moses and his sister Miriam leading them out. "The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation." It is the first song in the Bible. The wilderness is long and difficult. God leads them by a pillar of cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night, always present, always visible, always moving ahead of them. When they run out of food and begin to complain, something strange happens. In the morning, a thin, flaky substance covers the ground, like frost, but edible. Sweet, they say, like wafers made with honey. They stare at it and say the only logical thing. What is it? Which is, fittingly, almost exactly what the Hebrew word manna means. They have no category for what they're looking at. Bread appearing on the ground from nowhere, every morning. Enough for each day and not a crumb more. And the moment anyone tried to store it overnight, it rotted. The lesson was not subtle. You don't need to hoard the source that doesn't run dry. Come back tomorrow, the Lord's provision will be there again. They ate this bread for 40 years. Well, centuries later, a crowd who had just watched Jesus miraculously feed thousands with 5 loaves and 2 fish followed him across the lake looking for more. When he didn't produce another meal on demand, they started invoking Moses. Our ancestors ate manna in the desert. He gave them bread from heaven. Jesus looked at them and said something that reframed the entire story. It was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven. My Father gives you the true bread from heaven. The bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. And when they asked for that bread, he said simply, "I am the bread of life." Israel arrived at Mount Sinai, and here, God does something extraordinary. He enters into a formal covenant with the nation of Israel. He gives them the law, the 10 Commandments, followed by detailed civil, moral, and ceremonial codes. Not to earn his love, he already rescued them before any of this, but to shape them into a people who reflect his character in the world. And then he gives Moses the instructions for the tabernacle as well. The tabernacle is a portable dwelling place, a tent shrine where God himself would live in the center of the camp. And the instructions are extraordinarily specific. Each measurement, each material, every piece of furniture described in precise detail. The Ark of the Covenant, the lampstand, the altar of incense, the curtains separating the holy place from the most holy place. The whole structure is a picture of heaven meeting earth, of God and humanity dwelling together the way they were always meant to. The book of Exodus ends with the tabernacle complete, and the glory of God, a visible physical cloud, fills it so powerfully that even Moses, the man who spoke with God face to face, cannot enter the tabernacle. Leviticus. And here is where most people's Bible in a year plans fall apart. Laws about animal sacrifices, skin diseases, what you can and cannot eat, bodily discharges, priestly procedures described in extraordinary detail. Leviticus is the book that has defeated more good intentions than perhaps any other piece of literature in human history. But before we get into what's in it, notice how it begins. The book of Exodus ended with God filling the tabernacle so completely that Moses couldn't even go in. The glory of God was there, consuming and overwhelming. Leviticus opens like this. Now the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tabernacle of meeting. From the tabernacle. God is speaking outward from inside. Moses is still outside, receiving instructions through the door. Hold that thought, because we'll come back to it in a bit. Leviticus is asking one question, and asking it with relentless precision. How can a holy God live among an unholy people without destroying them? Because holiness and sin cannot coexist. God's presence is not safe to approach casually. The whole book is a detailed answer to how the gap gets bridged. The first 7 chapters describe 5 different offerings: burnt offerings, grain offerings, peace offerings, sin offerings, and guilt offerings. Each one addresses a different aspect of the broken relationship between humanity and God, and almost all of them involve blood. Leviticus chapter 17 verse 11 states it plainly. The life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls. Atonement, covering. The same pattern as those garments of skin in Genesis. Something must die, a cost must be paid. The high point, or perhaps the most somber point of Leviticus, is the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. Once a year, the high priest performs an elaborate ritual. 2 goats are brought, one is sacrificed, the other, the scapegoat, has the sins of the entire nation symbolically placed on it by the high priest laying his hands on its head, and then it's driven out into the wilderness, carrying the sins of the people away from the camp of Israel. 2 goats, one dies, one carries the sin away. Both are needed to tell the full story of what atonement means, and both together still feel somehow incomplete, like a picture waiting for the real thing. The book ends with blessings and curses. Obedience leads to life, disobedience to catastrophe. It's a solemn close to a solemn book. Numbers. Now notice how Numbers begins. Now the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tabernacle of meeting. In the tabernacle. Moses, who couldn't enter at the end of Exodus, who was receiving instructions from outside the door at the start of Leviticus, is now inside the tabernacle. The entire weight of Leviticus, all those laws, all those sacrifices, all that detailed instruction about holiness, it worked. The gap has been addressed. The presence of God is no longer something that keeps Moses out. It's something Moses now meets with. It's one of the quietest, most easily missed transitions in the whole Bible. Numbers opens with a census. 2 of them, in fact, hence the name. Hundreds of thousands of fighting men counted, organized by tribe. Israel is a nation now, not just a family, and they set off towards the promised land. And then they complain about the food, about the water, about Moses, about the journey, about going back to Egypt as though slavery was something worth being nostalgic about. Repeatedly, in different ways, the people of Israel receive grace and then grumble about it. It's uncomfortable to read, partly because it's so recognizable in our own lives. The lowest point comes when they finally reach the edge of Canaan. Moses sends 12 spies to scout out the land, 1 from each tribe. They're gone 40 days and come back carrying clusters of grapes so large it takes 2 men to carry a single bunch on a pole. The land is everything God said it would be. But 10 of the 12 spies are terrified. They say, "The cities are fortified and enormous. The people are giants. We felt like grasshoppers in their eyes." And that fear spreads through the camp like fire. The people wail through the night. They talk about choosing a new leader and marching straight back to Egypt. They are standing on the threshold of the promised land, and they cannot take God at his word and trust him. What was supposed to be an 11-day journey stretches into 40 years. 1 year for every day the spies were gone. An entire generation, the people who watched the Red Sea split open, who ate bread from heaven, who saw the glory of God fill the tabernacle, died in the wilderness, not because God abandoned them, but because trust in the end is the one thing that cannot be faked or replaced. In the middle of all of this, a strange moment. The people are grumbling again, and venomous snakes appear in the camp. People are dying. They cry out to Moses, who cries out to God, and God gives him a peculiar instruction. Cast a bronze serpent and mount it on a pole. Anyone who has been bitten, if they look at it, they will live. It's bizarre. And Jesus himself later points to it. In the 3rd chapter of the Gospel of John, the same chapter as the most famous verse in the Bible, he says, "Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes may have eternal life in him." A snake on a pole in the wilderness of Numbers, death lifted up, becoming the very instrument through which life is given to those who look at it. Jesus wasn't drawing a vague connection. He was pointing directly at this story and saying, "This is what I am." Towards the end of the book of Numbers, Israel encounters a king named Balak, who is watching their advance through the region with growing dread. He doesn't try to fight them. He does something more unusual. He sends for a diviner named Balaam. This is a man with a professional reputation. Kings hired Balaam because his curses worked, or at least people believed they did. Balak sends emissaries twice, with escalating payment, specifically asking him to curse Israel before the battle begins. God meets Balaam on the road and makes one thing very clear. "These are my people, and you will not curse them." Balaam tries anyway. 4 times he opens his mouth to curse, and 4 times only blessing comes out. He's furious. His employer is furious. spoken against his own intentions and Balak's explicit wishes. He says, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. A star, a scepter, a ruler coming from a people who, at that moment, had no king and no throne. Balaam wasn't clueless. He was one of the most sought-after diviners in the ancient Near East. But what came out of his mouth that day was beyond his knowledge, beyond his framework, beyond anything that he could have intended. A star, representing the divine, and a scepter, representing royalty, points to a figure who is both divine and a human king. The Messiah in the fullest sense. It is entirely possible that many years later, when a group of wise men, all carrying gifts, followed a star to find the newborn who would carry the scepter of God's kingdom forever, were following this prophecy. A prophecy spoken by a reluctant pagan in the plains of Moab to an audience who wanted Israel cursed. The book ends with a new generation of Israelites, encamped on the eastern bank of the Jordan River. The Promised Land is visible across the water, and one leader remains with one last thing to say. Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is Moses' farewell. He is 120 years old. He knows he will not cross the Jordan River. God told him he wouldn't, in an earlier moment of disobedience at the rock of Meribah. So he gathers the people and he talks to them. For the length of an entire book, he talks to them. He retells the story. He restates the law. He reminds them who they are and whose they are. The name Deuteronomy means second law, not because the law has changed, but because this new generation needs to hear it for themselves. And at the center of it all, Moses gives them the Shema, the central declaration of Jewish faith, still recited in prayer to this day. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. Centuries later, a rabbi is asked which commandment is the greatest, and he quotes the Shema without hesitation. Buried in Deuteronomy, Moses makes a prophecy that is easy to read and easy to miss. He tells this people, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your brothers. You must listen to him. A prophet like Moses, someone who would stand between God and the people as a mediator, someone who would deliver the words of God directly, someone whose words would carry the same weight as the law itself. The disciples of Jesus heard this prophecy. They knew what it pointed to. When Peter stands up on the day of Pentecost and explains who Jesus is, this is one of the passages he reaches for. And there's one more thing. Moses cannot enter the Promised Land, but someone will lead Israel across the Jordan, and that person's name in Hebrew is Yeshua. We translate it in English to Joshua, but Yeshua and Jesus are actually the same name. It was Joshua who succeeded where Moses could not go, and it is Jesus, Yeshua, who would ultimately lead God's people into the rest that the Promised Land could only ever point towards. At the end of Deuteronomy, Moses climbs Mount Nebo. God shows him the land, the full sweep of it from north to south, from the hills of Gilead to the western sea, everything he spent 40 years leading his people towards, visible at last. And there, on the mountain, Moses dies. Let's take a step back now and look at what these 5 books have built. A world created in beauty and broken by a choice. A promise made in a garden that a child would come to crush the serpent. Garments of skin, the first sacrifice, the first covering of the first shame. Abraham on a mountain with a ram caught in a thicket. A father who received his son back as if from the dead. Joseph, betrayed and raised to glory, saving the very ones who rejected him. The Passover lamb, unblemished, bones unbroken, whose blood stained on the wooden doorposts marked the difference between life and death. A people passing through water into a new existence. Bread falling from heaven, water from a rock, a tabernacle where God comes down to live with his people. A system of sacrifice that never quite finishes. 2 goats that can tell the story of atonement but can't quite complete it. A high priest who enters the most holy place once a year through a thick curtain and comes back out again. A bronze serpent lifted up on a pole, and everyone who looks at it lives. A prophet promised who will be greater than Moses. A name, Yeshua, carried by the man who leads the people into promise when Moses cannot. The Pentateuch is not 5 unrelated ancient texts. It's a single, intricately woven piece of writing, laced with patterns and promises that the authors clearly intended to be fulfilled. They were not writing history for history's sake. They were laying down a trail of breadcrumbs. And if you've ever read the New Testament, you already know where that trail leads. That's the Pentateuch. 5 books, 1 foundation, and a thread of promise that starts in a garden and doesn't stop until it reaches a cross, an empty tomb, and a new creation. If you're new here or new to Christianity in general, I'd really encourage you to watch the introduction video, which can be found in the description, because it'll give you the full picture of what this channel is trying to do. If you don't have a Bible yet, I would recommend that you do get one, or you can download the free YouVersion Bible app, which I'm not affiliated to. It's just the app that I personally use myself. And again, you can find the link in the description. Next time, we're moving into the history books: Joshua, Judges, Ruth, Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles, where the Promised Land finally becomes a reality, where Israel gets the kings they've asked for, and where almost everything begins to go wrong in the most instructive way possible. Subscribe so you're there when it drops, and I'll see you in the next one.